The landscape of domestic adoption in the United States has changed pretty drastically just in the course of a couple of generations. These days, it's a lot more common for adoptions to be open adoptions, meaning that the adopted family and the biological family are aware of one another and know each other's names and possibly even have contact with one another. Or they're kinship adoptions, where the adopted child has been adopted by a family member. This gives the adoptee a lot of grounding within their own family. They know their heredity, they know their last name, they have some knowledge of who they are and where they came from. That's in stark contrast to the way adoption was handled when I was adopted. My adoption is a closed vital record adoption. All of the original documents regarding my birth were sealed away by the courts on the day that my adoption decree was signed. And as in all closed adoptions, birth certificates were amended to show that our adoptive parents were the ones who conceived us and gave birth to us. The original birth certificate still exists, but it is sealed, and at least in the state that I was adopted out of, the laws are such that I will never be able to see it. Searching for any information at all was generally a frustrating affair, involving things like petitioning the court for a copy of the original birth certificate, or hiring a private investigator to help, going by tiny scraps of non-identifying information that the adoption agencies gave out. It could get incredibly expensive to search, and there was often so little information available that it was pointless to even try. In my case, the non-identifying information was incorrect from the start, and that led to many dead ends. The laws governing adoption are different from state to state, and sometimes they're amended and changed, but not necessarily for every adoptee from every generation. My sealed records are unlikely to ever be unsealed in the state of California, unless I find a sympathetic judge who understands that the privacy concerns of my biological mother do not eclipse my own ability to own my own medical information, my own heredity, and my own birth certificate. Adoptees are not really ever considered full adults with all the human rights that a regular person has, at least in the eyes of the court. Commercial DNA testing changed that. Once adoptees could test our own DNA, our search for answers changed outlooks. Our own parents may not have done a DNA test, but it's not unlikely that somebody else in their family has already done it and made a family tree while they're out searching for their own genealogical information. I did my DNA on both Ancestry and 23andMe because I wanted to make sure I was getting the same information regardless of which service I used. I also wasn't certain if I was going to find any relatives, and I couldn't know ahead of time which one of the two services they might have used. Those are the most common of the two DNA services, by the way. I did get the same results from both services, so even though they were different from what I expected, my biological mother or the agency had put down the wrong man as my father, so I turned out to be a different heritage than I'd always been told, and that was a big surprise. The biggest surprise, though, was that I had DNA relatives, a lot of them. I was overwhelmed and not really sure what I needed to do next, and that was when I found my wonderful search angel, Kathy. A search angel is a person who volunteers his or her time, energy, and expertise to help adoptees find their families. They can also be used by the birth family in order to find their lost child. Many search angels are experts at sifting through genealogical information that you get a flood of after you get your DNA results. They can sort through the DNA relatives, they can look through the historical records, they can even do basic private detective work to locate people and to help you build out your actual family tree. Some of them even assist adoptees with making the first contact with their newly found family. Basically, angel is exactly the right word for them, and I hit the jackpot when I found Kathy. She had years of experience, and she'd been doing this in her off hours for so many adoptees. She had all kinds of advice for me. Kathy looked through the work that I had already done and confirmed that I was correct. I had found my father. She helped me build out a family tree, my very first one ever, and she was able to look at all of my non-identifying information and pull out the important piece, which was the matriculation records, the records of who was attending what school, that helped us ultimately figure out exactly who my mother was. I found Kathy through the adoptee message board on Ancestry.com, but there's a few other places that you can look for a search angel if you want one. There's a few groups on Facebook. There's one called DNA Search Angels, one called Search Squad, and one called DNA Detectives that I've heard people say good things about. There's also individual listings for search angels at G's Adoption Registry, which looks like an old GeoCities website, but is a pretty good resource nonetheless. One word of advice that I have for you is to not pay for a search angel. Don't pay for one of the search companies that will come up when you Google search angels. These companies are often scammy. They'll take your money and just do the absolute minimum. They get very expensive very fast, and it's likely that any of the work that they actually do for you is something that a volunteer search angel would have done for you more thoroughly, faster, and for free. I will try to put a few links under the video here in the description box for anybody that might be looking for a search angel themselves. Once again, though, stay away from the companies that will ask you to pay for these services. They're generally preying on people's emotions. Okay, if you've come this far, now I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual painting that you can see me doing. I work in watercolor, transparent watercolor. The only thing on this painting that is not transparent watercolor is the gold lettering on the matchbox itself. I work in multiple layers, and I generally work from light to dark. I don't always do that, but that is usually what I'm doing. In this particular painting, these are the versions of cuckoo chicks that I've come up with. They look pretty similar to what an actual cuckoo chick looks like, but I've kind of given them a little bit more human emotion in the faces. I painted these two to represent myself and my adoptive sibling, who has different parents. We've both done searches and managed to find our genetic relatives. The cuckoos, once again, are my stand-in for adoptees and their biological parents, because the cuckoo is a brood parasite that lays its eggs in other birds' nests and lets the other birds of different species raise those chicks for them. I'm pretty sure the matchbox is self-explanatory. It represents the DNA matches that we are finally able to find. I've called this painting Home To Roost because I feel like since more and more of us are doing our DNA and are able to locate our biological families, adoptees are one by one coming home to roost. All of my best to my fellow adoptees who are searching out there. Keep going.